Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website about reimagining your life. Thanks for joining me today to talk about, well, basically what's one of the scariest things you can think of in life. So let's get started. So, if you like what you hear today, please leave a like, tell your friends, send me a message. And also, I'm a little early tonight because tonight there's a big All Saints Day Eve, known as Halloween in the U.S., Spanish Mass tonight. And of course, it's right at the same time that we normally join each other. So a little change up tonight. So now I'm not especially fond of the modern day Halloween, but Day of the Dead, and as they do it in Mexico, is really very inspiring. Um, it's all about celebrating the lives of those that came before you. It's really very interesting holiday. It's not at all what the parties are about. However, there is a huge display celebrating Mexican Week at the Rockefeller Center in New York City. It's going on now. I think it's on through this weekend, and that's the URL, rockefellercenter.com/events/Dia de Muertos at Rockefeller Center. So I'm going to go through a little presentation. If you haven't seen it or you're not particularly familiar with it, we'll see if this works. And I'm going to try and share my screen and see how this goes. We'll get rid of the banner. There we go. So basically, the event overall is not only Dias de los Muertos, rather, but it's Mexican culture in general. So there's a bunch of displays on, and I have various pictures of it. I have to find where my mouse is. And this is another really interesting one. There's a whole series of these. That was Marilyn Monroe. I have another picture of her coming up. And these are all to represent people who came before us, is what it's all about. And there's Marilyn again in all her beauty, and you can see it's a really neat modern interpretation of it. And these are Katrinas, which are I'm sorry, this is the Katrinas are the statues. This is a lot of times people dress up. Oh, we have an ad instead. Sorry, dress up for it. And that gentleman was one of the people who appears in a lot of the videos. And it's a very typical dress where the large hat, the extreme makeup, and we'll see more of that in a second. And then this is kind of a modern rendition of an altar to your ancestors, your forebearers, and it's really very neat because particularly in Mexico, but for particularly and Mexicans living abroad, you'll see that they actually decorate the altar with things that were special to the person who they're remembering. So if they had a particular drink or food they liked, they'll put little replicas of that on the altar. And it's to see them in person is really, it's very sweet because you realize how much they miss this person. And so they remember the things that they did for, that other person did for them every day at this time of year. And more statues that are appearing. And I'm going to see if this works. This is a video from Rockefeller Center talking about, if I can get things set up here, talking about the activities going on now. It's about 90 seconds long, so not too long. So I hope you enjoy it. So Mexico is a culture that's very, very steeped in tradition, and they get traditions from a number of different cultures, which makes it very interesting. And
Welcome
so,
back to Western Wild.
oops,
In today's video, we're going to
and sometimes we forget to stop the movie. Um, and so it's a very interesting culture, and if you've ever been there and seen it in person, the one thing you realize it is, if nothing else, it's extremely colorful and very, very energetic culture. And so where I go in Guanajuato is one of the places they make a huge deal of, um, of Dias de los Muertos. And they decorate the streets. I mean, when I say decorate the streets, they actually make big drawings on the streets, remembering the people that came before them, or things that are important to the culture. And it's really quite an event to see. If you ever have the chance, or if you're around in New York State, around New York City, in the Northeast, stop by Rockefeller Center for this weekend, and you'll check it out. And hope you enjoy what you find. So that's more what I think of when I think of Halloween. However, since it's required, almost required, it seems, for everybody to have some sort of relation to Halloween and everything they're doing today, I can't give out candy, obviously. This is a podcast. So we'll use the topic scary for today. And so I'm going to talk about one of the things I find, one of the most scary things that could happen in life. And, it's it really comes down to basically not living life to the fullest when we have the chance. I was at a 40th ordination anniversary for two priests that I know this past weekend. It was excellent. It was a good time, right? It was a lot of fun. Met a lot of people I haven't seen in a long time. But it was fascinating seeing many people that I hadn't seen in many years and seeing how some had changed and how they had changed. I remember a book I started to read, didn't get very far in it, but it was by Dr. Phil, which explains why I didn't get very far in it. But it actually opened pretty nicely because he had a story about going to a high school reunion. It was like his 30th or 40th high school reunion or something. And a person who he kind of knew, ran up to him, Phil, how's it going? I see you're famous. That's great. And he talking and said, remember that football game we had, that some particular football game against some team? And his answer was kind of interesting. He said, actually, no, I don't. It's been 40 years. And, there's been a lot more things to focus on in those 40 years than that high school football game. And that kind of really sums up my thoughts, right? Some of the people who I met and who I meet every day are still living the good old days, while others couldn't wait to tell you about all the new things they're living in their life now. It was very interesting how they had a very kind of split view on how they viewed life and their place within life. And not shockingly, those people, the ones who are all excited and telling you stuff, they seem to be happier and more satisfied with life in general. To be clear, not everyone is having a fabulous time, not by any means, but they're making the best use of what they had, and that made a big, important difference in their lives. Remember last week, we talked about the need for satisfaction and purpose. That tends to lead to enjoyment, which typically brings happiness. Right? It's a real important path. Happiness isn't something you get. Happiness results from enjoyment. And enjoyment typically results from satisfaction in what you do and fulfilling a purpose in life. So, it's important to note that happiness is not really the goal. It's the result of doing enjoyable things that bring satisfaction and purpose to your life, and that's what brings you happiness. It's really people confuse pleasure and happiness very often. So as always, there are many uncertainties in the world today, right? But there's nothing new about that. What strikes me as different, though, is that many people are focused on pleasure, not happiness. And pleasure doesn't often bring happiness, as we talked about last week. And it's often kind of fleeting. What you found really, if you started doing something that was pleasurable, and yesterday it was just really great, and today it's okay, and tomorrow it's kind of like, well, it's a little boring. We've been doing it for 2 days now, right? I remember once I was on a business trip. It was actually pretty funny. A friend of mine was holding my dog, and it said, can you just hold her for a couple of days? I'm supposed to be back in like 4 days. Kind of skipped the details of the story. I was gone for 4 weeks, and she was a good sport. Held the dog for 4 weeks, and she got along with the dog. The dog got along with her. That part was fine, but I was next to a place, Abdow's Big Boy. It was called. It was a chain restaurant, and one of the things they had was an all-you-can-eat breakfast for like, I don't know, $3.50 at the time or something like that. And you go over, and one of the things they had was this big thing of bacon. You could take as much bacon as you want. And I thought, this is awesome. If I'm going to be stuck somewhere, being stuck in the bacon capital of the world was probably about the best place you could be stuck in. And the first day was great. The second day was great. The third day was pretty good. Fourth day was nice. Fifth day, I was getting pretty sick of bacon. And that's the way pleasure works. Pleasure doesn't stay consistent. You have to have new challenges. And when bacon is a treat, bacon's a treat because you don't get it very often. But when you have it every day and it's predictable, the pleasure goes away from it and it doesn't bring happiness anymore. But enjoyment resulting from satisfaction and purpose, that never gets old because what's happening is you're fulfilling, and what it is you're fulfilling is always changing and it's improving. But enjoyment-based happiness is different in another important way as well. The focus is typically different. It tends to point outwards, not inwards. In a changing world, if you focus on things or for yourself, when the world changes, then you have to kind of change your definition of happiness, right? Because if you're saying, oh, what'll make me happy is a new SUV. You get a new SUV and everybody says, oh, SUVs are bad. You should drive a small car, but now you got this SUV. So it made you happy yesterday, now actually makes you sad today. But if your purpose rather is getting really efficient transportation that you like, even when the world changes, you're still fulfilling your own purpose. Important distinction. If your purpose is to help children graduate high school or help your own grandkids be prepared for work, the actions to accomplish those tasks, they may have to change as the world changes, but the goal does not change. And so your satisfaction doesn't change, and your purpose is always fulfilled, and that brings you enjoyment. But what's the scary part in all of this, right? It's supposed to be Halloween after all. Well, every day I meet a lot of people who essentially stop living life at some point for a variety of reasons. Maybe when they left school or moved, or maybe they were fired from a job. There are many reasons, but essentially only one result. They've isolated themselves from life, and so they cannot truly enjoy what life has to give. Think of it as going to a performance, a nice big live performance. If you go to a live event, you have everything all about the show is all around you. The smells, the people, the noises, the emotions. Maybe some things are annoying, but some things are really neat. And, maybe a lot of things that you came to see, you saw, maybe you missed some, but you saw a bunch of things you didn't expect. It is life in the reality, in person. Now think about going to a movie you've seen of a live performance. Maybe a rock tour or even Woodstock, which happened around here, a Formula One event. They can zoom in, get interesting sound bites, and see things that you couldn't see at the live event. But it's not really the same, is it? Right? You don't smell the smells. You don't hear all the sounds. You don't see all the little distractions that give you all the nuances in life. That's what sets apart a really good movie, right? From just kind of an average movie. And I've seen some really interesting technique talks on this, where on a really interesting movie, they have a dialogue, but then they notice that behind the person, something is there that sets the tone for the dialogue. Or you look around the room and it looks like, if you were to look around my room, you'd be shocked, but basically my room is my personality. It's all the little things. But very often on an inexpensive movie set, you look around a room and maybe the table has a vase of flowers in it, but they don't have any little pictures. They don't have any little knickknacks around. And a good movie has all those little things, so it really draws you into that scene, makes you part of the movie. And that's what happens in real life. And it's very hard to get that on watching something from a distance. Another problem is when you look at a movie or a show or any sort of production, and this includes shows like news, I'll make a mention of. When you see that, what you're seeing is what the director thinks is important. Maybe there's some close-up of some particular event, but you're really interested in a different part of the scene. When you're actually at the event, you can look at what draws your interest. But when you look at what somebody else has decided is important, you may not connect with it near as much. They're looking at that wailing guitar because they're a guitarist, but you always like drummers, and the drummer's over there, you can't really barely see him in the side of the frame. So that's the difference between not really experiencing life and really experiencing it firsthand. And, there's a lot of aspects to that. But what it comes down to is the live performance is life in all its good and bad aspects. And there are wonderful parts and bad parts and peaceful parts and scary parts. But to me, the scariest part is to never really get involved with life because it's disappointed you or seemed too complex. There are a lot of good and very valid reasons, but if you walk away from it, life becomes very hollow, it becomes something that you look at rather than being a part of. You only look at it through the evening news or the social media. You're letting someone else dictate what parts of life you see. And they have a different agenda probably than you do. And that's the really scary part on a lot of different levels. Even if they are honest, chances are they'll just look at life differently than you. And you'll miss many things that would bring you joy and that you could enjoy just because you're you. The directors, whoever they are, you're you. You have different things. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, I could never try to sing in a foreign language, because I mentioned before I sing in the Spanish choir. But then they go on social media and they see a 15-year-old girl who speaks no English and yet does a perfect rendition of a Taylor Swift song. It's not magic, it's not culture, it's just desire. That little young girl, at 15 years old, really wanted to sing this song and figured out how to do it. And that's the biggest risk of not really embracing life. You lose the desire to discover all that the world has to offer. And that isolation tends to make you kind of jaded, kind of as a justification for the isolation itself. There are many really good reasons, obviously, to be wary of life, difficult in home life, trauma of any sort, external influences, all sorts of situations. Obviously, life is not a perfect situation all the time. But many people will look at the same circumstances and take very different actions. We've talked about how we can react to a situation, but acting differently takes another step further, right? So we can think about a situation differently, but then we can also act differently when a situation happens. And I think part of it has to do with practice. If you take little tiny chances, you will learn to succeed in little tiny steps, and you'll be willing to take bigger risks. Risks, I'm not talking about needless risks like foolish behavior or something like that. Rather, it's just pushing yourself to perform at a higher level and to engage more with life, both more often and more deeply. I've known a few people who have traveled extensively as children, and their worldview is entirely different than other people who grew up in one area. It's really very fascinating. And one of the often common characteristics is that they're more willing to try something new that'll expand their horizon, their experiences. It could be as simple as trying some new food or trying to learn a local dance or something larger like trying to understand a culture's history. But they tend to be curious about all aspects of life. They're living life by actually being at the real performance, not the live broadcast or even worse, the edutainment documentary, but the real event. They're actually there. They're actually participating in life in every way. And when you meet them years later, they not only have the memory, but the actual experience of being there. They have an energy that you don't get from viewing life remotely. And it's kind of scary to think about how many people now think that remotely viewing life is the same as living life. And they really do think that way. Where I hike, I have talked about this, I think, kind of before, but where I hike, a few years back, there was just a spate of deaths from people who essentially walked off a rather tall waterfall. And you say, well, how would they do that? Because they see all sorts of dangerous stunts on reality TV every day and nothing happens. And it was just amazing. I was there once when it was below freezing. There was ice all over the stream. And somebody hopped across the stream about 1.5 feet from the waterfall with the expected result. And they fenced everything off now so you can't get near it. But it's just kind of like, why would you have to fence something off? You're here, it goes down there, and it's just a straight drop. Why would you ever risk things? And it's because people have been so far removed from life that they forget what life is really about. Life has some great things, like the view of the waterfall, but it is a waterfall. It is a cliff. By watching life remotely, they thought they understood how it worked, but when they're actually there with the wind and the pebbles and slippery rocks and all of that, it's not at all like the TV special on, the best waterfalls or whatever. I know it's often difficult, but I would encourage you to really get out and try and experience the world firsthand, first person. Use common sense, of course. But if you're in this area, go to the Rockefeller Center. It's not, even that is still somewhat overproduced, but you'll see a lot of people there who are very genuine. And they'll be talking about their ancestors. And they'll be remembering them and talking. It's very different than like the 90-second clip that I showed you. Because when you're actually there, you see it. You smell the food that's being made. You actually get the Mexican culture. And if you don't want to do Mexico, go pick some other culture and some other major event and go there and really experience it. Obviously, you don't do something really foolish, But do recognize that life has its challenges, and one way to avoid them is to discover them. And you can't discover life by trying to leave it behind a computer screen. I've seen so many YouTube videos that are essentially, well, they're typically one guy or one girl in a camper traveling around some country. Often it's just the US, and they have tons of followers. Why? Because they're actually living real life. The goods are really good. Sometimes there are bad things, but they're getting experience in overcoming challenges. And they're also living life consistent with their purpose, which is to travel, meet people, discover situations. But wait, remember? Satisfaction and purpose. Satisfaction and purpose tend to lead to enjoyment, which leads to happiness. So the real reason people often follow them is because they're genuinely happy. It's kind of like, I want to be like that. And what they forget is the reason they're happy is because they're doing what they want to do. They're out in life really doing it. And that's the difficult part to take. So by living life in person and not virtually, you give yourself the best way to attain true and lasting happiness. The best travel shows aren't half as good as a bad trip to a place you really wanted to visit. You'll get back and say, can't believe it, right? The hotel didn't have a room and it took us 2 hours to check in and everything else. And when you're all done, you had a great time. Tons of things happened. You met a bunch of nice people at the hotel that helped to get everything squared away and straightened out. You had great stories. You had a fantastic time. It's just, so even a bad trip, as I say, bad day of fishing is better than a good day at work, right? Life isn't always perfect. But coupled with what we've learned about managing our attitudes in the previous episodes, remember, life can be consistently pretty darn good. Okay, that was a big long talk tonight. Thanks for sticking around. Remember that we only have one life, and it's up to us to live it in a way that brings us the most meaning to ourselves and to our purpose. Because just cruising through life, mindlessly following some crowd or politically correct agenda to either side, will never be as satisfying as discovering life firsthand and truly experiencing it. Doing anything less as well, about the scariest thing I can think of. There, that's as close as I'll come to Halloween. And let's see if I can now. I had some emoji to put up and I forgot to copy it. Give me 2 seconds and let me see if I can do it really quick. And as I've often said, the best thing about StreamYard, which is the software that I use, and you can, awesome, you can put together a banner as fast as that. StreamYard, highly recommend them. So that's it for the evening. More reasons I hope for you to just really live life firsthand. There'll be problems, sure, but there'll also be great times and it'll be with you forever. Your homework, always optional, is to think if you tend to take little risks and put yourself out there in life or stay quietly back and kind of out of sight. Did you ever want to do something different and be adventurous? Be honest with yourself. It's only you who knows your answers. And, if you're thinking, my mother actually one time, she told me her name was Catherine. And she always wished people called her Kathy. And I said, well, why don't you just, when you went to nursing school or after you got out of nursing school, whatever, just say, man, my name's Catherine, but everybody calls me Kathy. She goes, it didn't seem right. My mother would be disappointed. And what's interesting is she was telling me this story when she was in her 90s. So she spent 90 years wanting to do something, but let somebody else's opinion keep her from doing it. Don't do that, right? If it's something you really want to do, be honest with yourself. Think about, how can I make this change? How can I make it happen? Extra points if you think of one small thing to try. Some new food, say hello in a different language, rent a camper instead of a cabin next time you go on vacation. Now, it'll be even better if you try doing it for real, like in the real world. Then write down how it felt, and don't forget to celebrate any wins. The celebration is super important. We talk about this a lot. Super important so your brain really learns that success and doing things that you're committed to doing really make you happy. So that's truly it for the evening. Thank you so much. As always, remember ukr7.com. That is a list of links where you can support Ukraine. World Central Kitchen is there also, wck.org. They work in any area of disaster. And I've mentioned a couple of times, I tend to support Ukraine. I know there's other disasters in the world. And by far and away, whatever resonates most with you, I would encourage you, please get involved with some group, an individual, just somebody you meet in the street, just say hello. That Remember, one of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others, because it takes your focus from inside of you to out to the world, and that really opens up your world a lot. So if you can and you're able, please check out UKR7, WCK.org. There's a number of sites now, various donations for a lot of the strife going on in the world. And like I say, even if it's just something you do local, even if it's just being pleasant to somebody, anything you can do to make the world just a teeny bit better will be appreciated by everybody. As always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting or useful, please pass it along, and please hit that like button. If not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. Have a great week. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone. See you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thank you.